what direct action to me is most interesting is, and I hope we would think about this as revolutionizing hope and incorporate it, is when we just take the world for ourselves and start doing it now the way we want it to be done. So to go back to the Pittsburgh example, to some degree, that's true when people say, we're not going to ask for permits, we're just going to be in parks, we're just going to be in streets, because we're just going to say, parks are public, they should be public, we should be able to do what we want with them, because we are the public. So there is an element of that, but it's very ephemeral in the moments of demonstrations. But so that begins to get at a direct action of taking spaces that were just like, if we had a world, what would parks look like? What would streets look like? What would our cities look like? And how would we make those happen all the time? And I don't think we do that enough. And when we do that, we don't actually tell people that that's part of why we're doing it. So the critique I would have of Pittsburgh is that people aren't transparent enough about, look, we're not just doing this because we're militant and trying to shut things down and get those world leaders to listen to us. We're doing this because space should be public, and we're going to make it public ourselves without getting anyone's permission, because we are the world. That's what's direct action and prefiguration. Okay, so that's the first thing I would hope you think about this weekend. Take away is, how can you, in every project you do, add elements that prefigure, even when you're doing a protest. To go one more time back to Pittsburgh, folks put into place spokescouncils, where many of you have probably been to, where people get together and try directly, democratically, to determine what's going to happen. And that is the most interesting part of those demonstrations to me. It's where people say, let's practice how to be directly democratic so we don't have to rely on mayors and city councils and presidents and G20s or G3s or G8s. That we can do it, start doing it, and we're really bad at it. And so from what I heard, that spokescouncil was pretty horrible. And they made a bad choice in terms of how they facilitated it, and it was really hard to make a decision. But we're really bad at these things, and so we have to learn to prefigure. But what I wish those folks had done in Pittsburgh too is to say, this is why we're doing this demonstration, is to learn to do this, and this is the way we should be making decisions. Come to our convergence, come to our spokescouncils, and learn with us how to make decisions about the world. That's again what I mean by prefiguration. That's what's important about going to Pittsburgh, maybe, is showing those things. Okay. So the other four categories that I think would be, that's my first point, is to try to think all weekend in your own work how you do that. The second category is actually reclaiming the world and making it common again, which now these are sort of categories of how direct action might look if we're going to do it, or prefiguration. Is that we intentionally remake a commons, or perhaps we already know that the world is our common, and we try to figure out a way to illuminate that again, to assert the fact that spaces were all of ours together, and that we need to make them that again. So how do we reclaim spaces? And in a lot of the contemporary movements, that's become both just a slogan or something that people associate with temporality, ephemerality, that you reclaim something for a couple hours and you feel great about it. And I'm in a study group right now in the Bay Area, and we were joking about how in Europe they always take over and reclaim things and occupy things for 2 weeks to a month. And the state kind of knows that in Western Europe, and they're like, great, let's give them their 2 weeks or a month, and then we'll crack down. In the United States, it's like people are like, well, we're going to take over something for a day. And that's kind of the time limit usually, and are often a couple hours, and we're all really proud that for 8 hours we held something. So it's really interesting, different parts of the world, and that both are almost ridiculous, because the police also know that that's sort of the time frame that people are going to have the stamina to maintain things. But what I'm talking about is how we can do that really for the long term, is say this is our commons and we're not going to give it back, and we're going to defend it and hold it. And there's many more powerful movements around the world that have done that for much longer than the ones we know really well, from the Zapatistas to the Brazilian landless movement, where people just are like, this was our land, this was our food, this was our healthcare, we're going to start just doing that. But I'm talking about space, because if we don't have spaces to see each other, to talk to each other, to create the world materially, we can't make the world together. It's just a conversation. So what does that look like, and how would we do that? And it's really powerful when people are in spaces that we're making together. That is revolutionizing hope, because there's something joyous about doing something together ourselves, our own space. So it's not only revolutionizing that we're defying commodification and alienation, but we're also really becoming who we want to be in spaces. And so one thing that I think has been really powerful of late of people reclaiming is there's one thing that has been happening in the United States and in Canada as well, because there's Canadian folks here, there's probably people from other parts of the world, is housing takeovers. And what I think has been beautiful about that is it prefigures, to me, it also has this prefigurative moment where you're saying, wow, there's people sleeping on the streets, there's people sleeping in cars, and there's all these empty buildings that are just sitting there. And more, there are a lot of empty buildings because of the foreclosures. And it makes no sense because under capitalism, you know, unless you have something to exchange for that empty space, you can't move from a street corner into a empty space because there's that thing is a piece of exchange value. And so what's interesting about housing takeovers to me is it suddenly illuminates the fact that, wow, we could actually just use that building, it's there. And capitalism doesn't want us to do that in a way. It wants to erase the fact in a sense that things have a use for us. And so people shattering, in a sense, the myth of why, if there's space, why wouldn't we all be able to just use it? Reclaiming that and doing housing in ways that people feel they want their housing to look like and rebuilding what housing looks like. I think there's an element of that, both that's shattering the present and as a critique, implicit critique, but should be brought out, but also as holding space that should be ours in the first place. People, for most of human history, just used to make their own housing, and people used to have housing, and it used to be something that people just had. It's a very, very recent thing that housing was something that you had to have money for, you don't get as a human being. That's a really odd thing. So that's a really big category I hope we can think about over the weekend, is what it would mean to create commons and reclaim them, that we would use it but not have ownership over it or control over it, or power, use it to control other people. The next big category of sort of prefiguration or direct action is to all of us to re-educate or relearn, and I don't mean that in a crass top-down manner, but together with each other for lifelong. I think one of the big problems in a sense of why we can't revolutionize hope is that people, by and large, we're not taught to think critically about the world. We're not taught to see that how we educate ourselves is part of a lifelong process precisely to get freedom. That the more we become aware of the world, I'm not talking about opening up books necessarily and learning facts and figures or how to do social theory or how to use the latest French theory to write manifestos. What I'm talking about in a sense is how do we learn to actually understand. What I love about philosophy is it used to be thousands of years ago, in a sense, and this is how I understand philosophy, it's something everybody could do, and what philosophy is asking, what is the right thing to do? What is a good thing to do? What does a beautiful thing look like? What is truth? And all of us can answer those questions. What kind of world do we want to live in? Philosophy is asking the questions about what the world should be, and we can all do that. We can all do that all our lives. And so in a way I want to bring out education and say, wow, we can at every moment be thinking about how do we educate ourselves, to go back to the example of Pittsburgh about the directly democratic spaces, how do we educate ourselves to actually engage in assembly structures and making decisions directly democratically so we can do it well, because we're going to be bad at it. So it's going to be our own process of educating ourselves as we're also trying to take power and do our own. And that we see that as education, that we need to learn what conflict resolution looks like and try it, and then realize it's not working and learn again and try it again. That learning is something through experience. That we need to start study groups so we can think about ideas and debate them and get agitated and angry and then excited about something we can do in our community and then go out and do it, because almost always they turn into something like that. Or that we can think about different ways of making education participatory so we're all both learners and thinkers at the same time. But it's an integral part of life. And the reason I think that's a huge category right now is because not that people are stupid, but because education has been about cramming information into people to get them to sort of fit into the way the world is. And education to me should be about wisdom, about opening up what we want, how we want to, again, think about the world in ethical categories. Think about how we want to see the world be. And sure, we might need some facts and figures, we might need some French philosophy, we might need our own experiences to bring back and just debate, but we don't take that seriously enough about, and if we can't think critically about the world, then we're just accepting that it's okay the way it is, I think. And so I think it's a really key category. Okay. And I think it's really a hopeful category because it gives people their own sense of power. When they're like, wow, I can imagine a different world, and through the fact of talking with each other, and that is the beginning of wanting to do it. Okay, another 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll finish up.